Hi guys, well, another week just flown by. Oh my goodness. And this time last week, I had no idea who was going to be my guest for the coming week, or maybe you're just going to get me. And just magic happens, doesn't it? You put it out there and you attract amazing things. Our guest this evening is just unbelievable. I can't wait to interview her. But before we do, just something that links us both. I got a Facebook this morning comment, nice comment. Keep up the Wednesday night sessions. My wife is now a regular attendee too. Seed oils now banned from the house. Kerrygold butter from grass-fed cows has replaced all the margarine. We're getting there. Intermittent fasting and giving all the grains the heave-ho, and 13 pounds down in 4 weeks. Isn't that a wonderful comment? And so
amazing.
So here's the thing, guys. Belinda Fettke is huge in this world, in this movement that as you know, I've been promoting for 4 years now. But one of the reasons why I think the timing's amazing is the very week that I've discovered that YouTube has removed some of my videos. I mean, wow. Oh my God, why would they do that? It's just, I'm shocked, to be honest, because as you all know, I've got no agenda here. We're following coincidence. Yes, I'm into low carb and stuff. And we've had at least one person beg to differ about what's going on. But anyway, so without any further ado, let me introduce to someone who has a story kind of similar, but much different in terms of what we got from Professor Tim Noakes. Some of you remember way back then, and his beautiful voice and wonderful voice. Belinda here has had massive challenges, is an amazing example of all of us who feel we just want to question things. Why shouldn't we? Why can't we? Anyway, without any further ado, guys, it's my absolute privilege to invite Belinda Fettke on. Belinda, welcome to our little thing here we do on a Wednesday night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jack, for inviting me.
It's very kind of you. Guys, you might begin to realise that Belinda's not from Glasgow. Belinda is down in Tasmania. My sister, who's in Melbourne, kind of cozily calls it Tassie.
Yes.
Her son, my nephew's there now. So, Belinda, can you tell us a wee bit about how you get into the low carb thing and a wee bit about your backstory? That would be amazing. Thank you.
I think it's really interesting chatting to a lot of people and finding out how many people come to low carb through their own health journey.
Yeah, me too.
And when you consider that, then you start to question the guidelines that are telling us to eat a high carb, low fat diet and think, well, why are these people who are going low carb, higher protein, healthy fats, why are they getting better? Why are they improving their health? So our journey has been a long one. My husband, who you are going to interview shortly, Gary says he grew up on polyunsaturated seed oils, on a high carb, low fat diet, and he believes his health deteriorated because of that diet. My mum was a dental nurse, so she was much, and we didn't have a lot of money, so she was much more into the real foods and low sugars and whatever else. But when I met Gary, that all went out the door and we went low fat. Oh dear. So anyway, our backstory, Gary and I started going out when I was 16 and he was 18. We were still at school, or I was still at school.
Yeah. And
so it's 40 years next month. So a very, very long time. When Gary was diagnosed with cancer when he was 37, 38, the year 2000, I'd never made an adult decision without him. Like, we'd grown up together, we'd done all these things together, and we weren't quite sure what to do. His tumor was quite advanced at the time it was discovered, so he required surgery, radiotherapy and chemotherapy to fight it at the time. Never looked or considered that the PET scan lit up like a Christmas tree to the glucose that they'd use for a PET scan. Didn't consider all of those things. He had to have further surgery in 2004. By 2009, they said, well, there's not really much else we can do. By that time, he had put on a lot of weight. He was on 10 medications, some to counteract the side effects of the other medications he was having. He was getting pretty sick. And he just thought, I'm just not ready. I'm not ready to go anywhere yet. So he started researching, and he'd been looking into the actual specific aggressive pituitary tumor. He'd been looking into that sort of thing, but he decided to go sideways and looked at a couple of guys in the US who were looking at the role maybe that sugar was playing as a harm in cancer management. And it just started clicking, just a few things. And so he ditched sugar. A few months later, thought, oh my gosh, processed carbohydrates turn into glucose the minute you ingest them, right, they're out. And he was very early on concerned about polyunsaturated oils. So I think he did his nutritional model of modern disease back in 2013 or 14. And instead it was the three things altogether that he thought were the perfect storm for health or not health.
Yeah.
And in taking back control of his own health, in starting to improve his own health parameters, coming off, I think 9 medications, he's down to just one, which he can't get rid of because he needs it for his pituitary function. But all the other things he's come off. He's lost weight, he's reversed his pre-diabetes, his cardiac arrhythmias have improved, he's gotten rid of his GERD, and just he's been off chemotherapy now for 7 years. So, you know, it's amazing. And he started to look at that and consider how he could use those same principles, low carb, healthy fat, and we didn't know about keto back then. I think he was considering low carb and healthy fats, but, you know, moving towards that keto diet for people with type 2 diabetes. So my husband is an orthopedic surgeon in Tasmania, and 20 years ago, he might have seen someone with an ulcer that needed debriding maybe once or twice a year. And I'm talking about debriding as in maybe having to cut off toes or forefoot or even a lower leg as a complication of diabetes. Yeah. By 2014, he was seeing someone every single week in his public clinic in northern Tasmania. And as you say, we're the other side of the world, but it's tiny. We've got a catchment area of about 120,000 people. Wow. And to him, it was shocking. He didn't go into medicine to band-aid sick care. And interestingly, he was reported to the medical board by a dietitian in his hospital for recommending that a patient, or one specific patient, reduce their sugar, maybe not eat the cereal for brekkie, and consider a low-carb diet. And this dietitian reported him to the medical board in 2014. And so Gary's case, it matched Tim's at the same time. They were going through the same sort of thing. Though Tim's was public, Gary's was private. It was all behind closed doors. And it was a Star Chamber investigation. It was just unbelievable. And I'd watched Gary improve his own health. I watched him improve health of his patients. You know, we're a small town. We'd see people in the street. They go, oh, wow, it's amazing. Yeah. Changing. I got him onto social media, and so we were seeing the stories come through like you've just shared with us. Yeah. And it's brings joy back to medicine. Like it makes you feel excited to empower people to take back control of their health. Yeah. So when he was reported for talking about the science, and at the time they argued that an orthopedic surgeon didn't have the qualifications to recommend nutrition, I just went, here's Gary talking about the science. There was a group called Low Carb Down Under. In fact, Gary had gone over and spoken in South Africa with Tim Noakes, who'd gone to one of his conferences. And we just went, I said to Gary, it's not about the science, darling. You're going blue in the face. Yeah. This is not about the science. There's something else that's happening here. So Gary and doctors and health professionals are talking about the science, biochemistry, physiology, and anatomy. And I'm watching them talk the science. I went, I'm going to look at the non-science. I'm going to look at the external factors of nutrition science. And I started by looking at the guy who was the expert witness in Gary's case. And he was an emeritus professor of nutrition, probably the biggest gun in nutrition in the Southeast Asia Pacific region. Wow. Called in to determine if a doctor in Launceston could recommend his patients reduce sugar. I thought he must work for the sugar industry, surely. Like, who else would be coming after Gary?
Yeah.
And I had no idea that he actually worked for the cereal industry.
Oh.
He worked for a company called Sanitarium here. And despite me providing evidence to the medical board, they completely ignored it. They said, we don't believe you. So I was just like, okay, 2.5 years, they investigated Gary before silencing him. It was a lifelong, non-appellable determination. And we could not use a lawyer. We could not go to the courts. It was absolutely ridiculous to determine that a doctor couldn't talk about nutrition with his patients, even sugar. And so we went to the National Health Ombudsman. That was the only way we could turn the case over, was to go and question the process.
Yeah.
So we had to call out the process as being faulty. So it's just ridiculous, Jack, to think that a doctor can't talk about sugar. So that's the back end of my story, and where I went with my research was the vested interests and the ideology shaping these plant-biased dietary guidelines. And it's been 6 years, 7 years, and I've just delved straight in.
Wow. Wow. And the thing is, from what I understand, you guys, well, Gary couldn't actually work over a period of, like, he'd lost his, was he potentially losing his livelihood, or?
No, he was able to continue to work because there was nothing wrong with his orthopedic surgery.
Yeah.
He just wasn't allowed to tell anyone how to not have surgery. He wanted to improve people's health. So he couldn't even tell someone to reduce sugar without risking losing his medical license. Okay. So I took over his Facebook page, his social media, and he refused to not talk to nutrition about his patients. He said, they can come after me. Yeah. I refuse to not do this. I'm not going to create harm. If they want to prove it, go for it. So it took another 2 years before the entire case was thrown out by the National Health Ombudsman. But in understanding that this expert witness worked for the cereal industry, and then the ties of the cereal industry to the Dietitians Association, and how that played a huge part in trying to silence Gary. I think Tim had Coca-Cola coming after him. Well, Gary had the cereal industry. Yeah. And I have, through my research, these two entities, Coca-Cola and the cereal industry, they've just got some crazy symbiotic relationship. One of them, the vested interests are intent on minimizing the harms of sugar. And I'd say especially Coca-Cola. Yeah. And then the other part of my research is ideology, or religious ideology to be exact. And they're intent on promoting fruits, grains, nuts, and seeds as the God-appointed diet for man. So you've got these two entities that have a symbiotic relationship and belief in demonizing saturated animal fats. Yeah. And they join because they both want to push pro-cereal grain, soy, one for profit and one protecting a profit island. It's been fascinating. And before we go further, I'd really love to stress that I'm not anti-vegan, not anti-vegetarianism, not anti-religion. No. What I've come to understand is that these vested interests and the religious ideology are shaping our dietary guidelines that have become strict rule books. Yeah. And these rule books are silencing Gary, silencing Tim, silencing low carb. And that choice to be supported to eat animal proteins and fats in our diet for our health is being taken away by those writing the rule books. And so it's about choice. Yeah. And supporting choice.
It's absolutely, I've known for about, I'm 4 years keto and low carb. Yes. like you said, I got into it because of my own health challenges. Yep. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've said this repeatedly, but I was diagnosed with something about 30 years ago, and the specialist, the top guy in Scotland telling me this, and he's saying, we don't know what causes this, we don't have a cure, but we'll give you one anyway. In other words, going to give you some drugs. I said, well, why would I take them? And I've always been someone who would question anybody, and he couldn't handle me asking him questions. He couldn't, well, I'm telling you what you got to do here. I said, well, you told me. Yeah. And that kicked me off on an alternative route. Yeah. because mainstream couldn't help me, so I'm now doing, I suppose, what Gary was doing. You look at, because the prognosis wasn't good, so, and funnily enough, they threatened me with horror stories to take their drugs.
Yeah.
And so eventually I gave in at one point. I did take some drugs, but I got back off them again. So I've always had this thing about, surely we can have debate. Can we not talk? Can I not find an alternative and have some sort of conversation with my doctor about it? And I just found that no, that was all closed down. But innocently, I had no idea of the sort of world we now live in, where Tim Noakes has his challenges, or Professor, forgive me, and Dr. Fettke, Gary Fettke, has this unbelievable story to tell. What we're seeing now, this is what's so dangerous about it, because of COVID now, they're blocking down anybody asking questions. In this, I don't know about Australia, but in this country, and even just yet, I buy the various newspapers to see what they're saying, and we're now getting subtly getting told, people who would refuse, for example, who don't want to take the injection or the, when it comes, are now being demonized already ahead of it. Like somehow or other we should all go to prison. I mean, it's getting quite ridiculous, just because people are begging to differ. I suppose that's an extreme for some people, but fundamentally, what I find really challenging is that we can't have an honest conversation. So sad,
As Gary said, science evolves from being challenged and debated, not from being followed. Yeah. And I think that's the point. It doesn't matter how many times Gary's brought up the fact that he's helping people reverse their type 2 diabetes, like he's improving health outcomes. And at the hospital that he worked in, that he hasn't worked in now since, I think, 2018, he walked away from that system because they were not going to change. They still offer 3 desserts per day to people with diabetes.
Yeah.
And it's just like, are you seriously not changing your guidelines because you don't want to admit that Gary was right? Or are you still so entrenched in this sugar doesn't cause harm? I mean, it's frightening to look and see the recommendations of diabetes associations, of dietitians associations, the Heart Foundation, all the others, still giving that same advice that, beware of saturated fat, low carbs, a fad diet, keto's going to kill you. And you look at people like Eric Westman, Tim and Gary, but Eric Westman's been doing it since the 1990s, and he's an amazing doctor in the US and supporting so many people. He's one of the few people who didn't come to low carb through his own health journey, but he came to it because patients said to him, I'm getting better. And he actually listened. And I think the problem is so many doctors, their education, it's jam-packed, and they're taught to read, repeat, reward. Yeah. And when you start to understand that the pharmaceutical industry has really shaped medical education, and then you've got the food industry adding their little bit onto the side of it as well, this education is, so it's not just the education, but then you've got the associations partnering with industry to protect the guidelines. Yep. And then you've got the fear of regulation. If you step outside those guidelines, I think it puts doctors into a very, very...
Oh, you're frozen. I'll come back.
This is your career and you haven't got anything else you can go to. It's very hard to question your education. It's very hard to not be thinking, surely, Diabetes Association of Australia, on their website, diabetes type 2 is a chronic progressive disease. And this is how you'll treat it. The Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, their handbook is, the 2016 to 2018 handbook was underwritten by Sanofi and AstraZeneca. I'm pretty sure they're the 2 pharmaceutical companies. On the back, their logos are on the back. The first 133 pages just talk about medicating people. Yeah. So it's their education. And I also think for Gary, as an orthopedic surgeon, it didn't matter quite so much. He was able to do it a bit more easily. But as a GP or an endocrinologist or someone in that space, how do you acknowledge it to yourself that you may have actually been creating harm, and then admit it to your patients? I think, we've got to work out how we can help doctors, and the more who stand up, the more who find out, and the more who believe in this, then they've got somewhere to talk and mentor and go, I was the same place. I was in the same place. Dr. David Unwin is amazing in the UK. And he's gone, I was about to retire. I was so unhappy with band-aiding sick care. And now I've found this, I don't want to leave. That, but you've got to have the right people who are there to support others who are really struggling with that concept that they might have created harm. And I'm sorry I ducked around to COVID a little bit.
We'll come back to COVID. We'll come back to
we don't have, in Melbourne, we've had a lot of lockdowns here. In Tassie, we've been fairly free. We pulled up the moat, put up the bridge, got a moat. We're separate to the rest of Australia. So we've been fairly lucky, and we've had 168 days, I think, with no cases. But we're about to open everything up for Christmas.
Fantastic.
And already it's all getting crazy, and I think we'll be in exactly the same place as you by next winter. But the difficulty is the laws are quite strict around what doctors and health professionals can and can't say. We've got enough problem just trying to talk about nutrition, let alone get into a lot of conversation about COVID. My concerns are the Great Reset and the Great Food Transformation. I'm more concerned about, this Eat Lancet, this dietary dictatorship about what we're going to eat is even stronger down this plant-based anti-animal protein and fat diet. So I'm focusing more, I think, on all of those things. And in Australia, a couple of years ago, it came out as law that if a doctor or a nurse discuss vaccinations in a negative way or question the role of vaccinations, they can be fined or jailed. So it's something that we steer clear of the conversation a lot here in Australia because it's already shut down. I can challenge this Eat Lancet planetary health diet, Great Food Transformation. I can challenge the role of vested interests and religious ideology on our dietary and health guidelines. And Sanitarium in Australia is owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's a health food company, and they have got their fingers in every pie trying to push their ideology that fruits, grains, nuts and seeds.
People know that people who follow me, when I heard Gary on a podcast, I think it was the two keto dudes, I don't remember which one it was, but and he talks about cornflakes. I had to stop walking my dog. I said, what? And I played it again and I thought, oh my God. But I don't want to steal his thunder because I'd love him to tell the audience whenever I get him. So if you could hold fire that, because when he says it, the way he says it, you're like, oh my God. So I'm looking forward to that. And I know Gary's going to. But
he had no idea, Jack.
No.
He had no idea.
No.
And the thing is, I was always sort of quiet. I'm a professional photographer. And so stay behind the scenes, behind the camera lens. And it was only when they came after him that we've talked about it. I didn't just stand behind him or beside him. I took a step in front and I used my voice to give him back his. And so I think that's really powerful, is understanding it doesn't matter who you are. All of us have the opportunity to just stand up and question and challenge and support these people who are making incredible challenges on their medical profession and challenging these guidelines because they need support in going forward. And I have, as I say, just spent years and years just looking up everything I could find. I uncovered documents outlining a partnership between the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturers Forum, trading as cereal for brekkie, of which Sanitarium was part of it, and Kellogg's and Nestle. They were paying the Dietitians Association of Australia $23,000 per annum. And the Dietitians Association of Australia, so this is where I'm questioning the doctor's education. Well, dietitians are educated by the food industry.
Yeah.
And so the Dietitians Association of Australia aren't only the regulatory body, the accrediting body, but the continuing education body for dietetics in Australia. They were taking money from the cereal industry and were expected under this contract to use their members to influence, protect, and actively defend not only cereal and grains, but sugars messaging. And my husband, in documents I found online, documents stating that Gary was targeted for active defense. And in finding these documents, we finally got access to 845 pages of documentation that the Launceston General Hospital, where Gary was working, that they prepared for the medical board. And at the time of this partnership, the CEO of the Dietitians Association wrote to Gary's hospital, pretty much demanding he be silenced. So this is the cereal industry influencing the dietitians, using the medical board as puppets to silence low carb. So when you see that, you go, I've got to tell this. I have to be loud. I have to just shake a tree.
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't be here doing this, and I wouldn't have a following if I hadn't worked with all of the big, including all the names you've mentioned, pharmaceutical giants. You know, I'd spoke at their conferences, I motivated their teams, I worked with their management. Innocently, not. I mean, if they're not going to come at me now, but if they ever had asked me to come and do another gig for them, I honestly couldn't do it. And the thing is, I met amazing, wonderful people, well-intentioned people in those companies, researchers and wonderful people, great people. And, you know, and if they hadn't given me the gigs, I wouldn't be here. You know, they were my biggest clients for a long time. But one of the things that you begin to appreciate is in the paradigm that's running. I mean, one of the things I keep saying every single week here is, oh, there's another week gone by like that. Time is so short now.
Yeah.
The universe is speeding up, or whatever it is, or we just got older and we realize it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think about, and most of us have doctors that are nice people. I've had a few crazy guys, but by and large, they're nice, well-meaning people, as are the nurses and so on.
And as are the dietitians who've got no idea that their parent body is doing that to them.
Exactly. And they've, you know, and their week goes by like that too. Where on earth in their busy weeks are they going to keep up with research? So most of them, their mindset is based on 20 or 30 years ago or whenever when they get trained, very little in between. The odd one will go to a conference, but by and large they can't, because too much time is spent just doing their job, and they're cram-packed with 5 minutes or 10 minutes with the patient. And then people like you and I come along and say, but why don't you look at this alternative? It's so challenging for them to. But I think that's where our responsibility comes in for every one of us watching this or listening to it is, you know, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Who's going to, I mean, I've got a doctor who lives just, I mean, I can, you know, his house is just there. And he's a leading doctor in this country. And I occasionally send him stuff. I said, going to watch this. And, you know, he's very kind about, I don't think he can comment, and I respect he won't comment, but at least I'm doing something about it. You know, sending an email to my own doctor, you know, can you look at this? Because it's obviously it's not going to come easily from the world out there. And when you know, even with my own family, if I raise it, I can see them glazing over. Oh, there's Dad again. He's always been a bit weird, you know, and you can just see them believing the paradigm that's presented to them. And even when people hear Gary talk about Kellogg's, unless you've got the kind of open mind that I think we have because of our own struggles, people can't hear it. No, surely not. It doesn't make sense. No. Because the paradigm is so strong. It's so strong.
In Australia, doctors have to go and do a certain amount of continuing education, and so do dietitians. But again, they're funded by the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry. You know, you go along in the stalls.
Yep.
At a general practitioners conference a couple of years ago, the sugar industry were there, teaching GPs how important mouthfeel is. You have to have sugar for mouthfeel to make all this low-fat stuff taste okay. You know? And you just go, really? They're handing out pamphlets telling about the importance of sugar to GPs. So again, I went through the Dietitians Association of Australia. I went through their vegetarian position paper.
Yeah.
And the references they used, all of them were from the cereal industry and from Sanitarium and Kellogg's. So I pointed it out to some dietitians. I said, did you realize that every single reference that the Dietitians Association has is from vested interests? And they said, oh my gosh, you believe your educator, you believe who's providing continuing education to be giving you the truth.
Yeah.
That they should be invested in improving health outcomes. You know, all their mission statements and whatever else, they said they never checked because they saw it had references and they believed it.
Yeah.
So it's when you start to look at these things and you go, well, it was compromised, it was biased. And again, Sanitarium provided a massive supplement in the Medical Journal of Australia in 2016.
Yeah.
And it was all paid for by the church, by Sanitarium, and about their beliefs. And their commercial arm, you know, did no harm to their commercial arm either, because they're selling not only cereals, soy milks, and fake meats. It's huge. And I think they're the biggest cereal sales in Australia and New Zealand, Sanitarium, and also an arm underneath them, Life Health Foods. They're the biggest fake meat provider in Australia. Yeah. And so their messaging is huge here. And I guess where you are and where we are, the church has a very small footprint in the UK and in Australia, but it has a very large footprint in the US and in third world countries. They've really gone into the South Pacific in a big way. Yeah. And they own 22 food industries worldwide. Yeah. And, you know, it's influencing education, they're influencing the beliefs of people as well. Like this plant-biased messaging, you've got to come go to the Life Health Foods website, and it's a vegan propaganda. Yeah. Sanitarium is very health washed and looks very nice, and it's all about health. But their Life Health Foods arm really says cows are causing global warming and climate change. So where's this messaging coming from? And heading into what I was discussing before, this Eat Lancet work, which is food industry and global elites trying to dictate that we shouldn't be eating any animal proteins and fats. And then you go on to the food transformation, great food transformation, you think, wait a minute, this isn't right. You know, we need animals on our soil. We need, I think, Frank Mitlomer, he does beautiful work with UC Clear and talking about how methane from cows has always been part of our, you know, it's been in our climate, it's been in our atmosphere forever, and it comes down again after 10 years. So it doesn't stay there, unlike fossil fuels and things. So I think people need to just start to go, why are we being told this? Where is it coming from?
Just, and we're talking about the Seventh-day Adventists, you know, when you use the term the church, just for people who maybe they'll think that's the church, wherever their church or Christians or something.
Yes, sir.
It's just one particular church who seems to have got incredible power. But again, I'll not steal Gary's thunder. I would like to just him to say what he says, because it's so...
He doesn't talk about that a lot, because that's all been my research.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love him just to tell the why cornflakes. I think that just that alone is just, anyway, I'm sure he will. But
he'll probably bring it up, but he's sort of going back to the science now. Yeah. He started talking about my research while he was the one who spoke about it first, because he didn't want me to come out and say it. Yeah. But yes, this is 7 years of my research. He's the science man. He's just done a chapter for a textbook with Tim Noakes. So
fantastic.
But yeah. he was just blown away when I started telling him what I was finding.
Yeah.
But yes,
So-
he'll certainly tell you.
So one would imagine if you're in a community that's only 120 or whatever it was, 1,000 people, and people talk and people are getting healthy, is there a kind of queue of people coming to visit, or are they finding it challenging to get to even get the chance for an appointment? What's going on there in terms of this?
You could probably ask Gary that question.
Yeah.
I think more and more people in Tasmania, or certainly in Launceston, they would have seen the headlines when Gary got silenced. They would have seen the headlines when he got exonerated. Like, it was front page in our newspaper, and a lot of people have heard the story.
Yeah.
And I think the medical board made the biggest mistake in trying to silence him, not knowing who they were coming up against.
Yeah.
Both of us were an incredible team.
Yeah.
And so we've just made it so loud.
Yeah.
And so their idea to silence this message backfired massively on them.
Yeah.
But yes, my research into the church, understanding that Seventh-day Adventist Church was founded in 1863. John Harvey Kellogg's father helped fund the start of the church. John Harvey Kellogg was a devout Adventist for 50 years.
Right.
And he grew up. He was only 12 years old when he first started typesetting for Ellen and James, the parents of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And his role when he was 12 years old was to typeset this book for Ellen called A Solemn Appeal to Mothers.
Right.
And it spoke only of the harms of providing meat to children, toxic stimulants. She believed that meat was as toxic a stimulant as tobacco or alcohol, and putting it in front of a child meant they would masturbate. So all of
So
it's
you said it.
It's a Puritan term.
Hold on.
You've said it.
Hold on. So I get the point, and we'll leave Gary alone with this. But since you've said it, can you just say it again? Because this is a thing that, I'm walking my dog, walking through the orchards, and suddenly I hear this, and I'm like, what?
So Kellogg,
Kellogg's.
he was 12. He was 12 years old, and he spent 4 years typesetting.
Yep.
Is it any wonder that when he became a doctor, he wanted to invent food that would take the place of meat, milk, and butter, which Ellen G. White said were things that would cause moral, physical, and spiritual pollution. Meat was the most heinous sin, masturbation or self-vice, that's the Puritan term. Self-vice was the most heinous sin at that time, that she believed God gave her visions in 1863 to tell her that fruit, grains, nuts, and seeds were the God-appointed diet for man, and flesh meat should not be part of the diet. She actually said that the fat and the blood of animals were prohibited. And you might think, well, how does that affect me? And I've alluded to it a little bit on and off, and was stunned to find out that it was affecting us. John Harvey Kellogg's protege was Lena Frances Cooper, and she founded the American Dietetics Association in 1917.
Yeah.
So while I can't prove that she was a Seventh-day Adventist or not, she was mentored and protéged along the beliefs of fruits, grains, nuts, and seeds. If you look at the cookbooks, if you look at the textbooks that she was writing at the time, and she had 500 dietitians under her tutelage over time at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, originally owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church and then owned by Kellogg. And he practiced the health reform beliefs of the church for his entire life. He edited their health magazine for his entire life. And he not only invented flaked wheat and flaked corn, of course, Kellogg's cornflakes, but he invented the first alternative meat, which was a nut meat analog. And then he invented protose, which was a gooey gelatinous legume in a can. It was the very first commercial meat alternative in 1892.
Wow.
So then he presented to the American Soybean Association, soybeans for human food. And he was intent on producing these foods. Ellen G. White came to Australia, unbeknownst to me, for 11 years, and she set up Sanitarium.
Right.
And the church didn't own Kellogg's. John Harvey Kellogg and his brother, William Keith, and William Keith ended up owning it on his own. They had a split.
Yeah.
But the church didn't own that. They would have gotten the tithe, but they didn't own it. In Australia, she set up Sanitarium so that the church would own it this time and the profits. And because it's owned by a church under law here in Australia and in New Zealand, it has charity status. So they pay no tax on any of their food products that they make, as marketed as health foods, originally designed by Kellogg's to curb sexual desires. So, this is massive. And okay, I have no issue if they're just making these foods and that's what they want to do. But Sanitarium is providing fact sheets for our doctors that at a click of a button on their desktop computer, doctors print out Sanitarium branded fact sheets for people with type 2 diabetes, for pregnancy, for insulin resistance, for all of these things. And they're promoting their products, they're promoting the fruits, grains, nuts and seeds, and doctors have no idea because they've health washed it so well. They're the health food company.
Yeah.
And we're so good at health food, we can give you a fact sheet and you can give it to your patient. They're paying the Dietitians Association of Australia to influence, protect and actively defend cereal and grains messaging, and they're targeting my husband.
Yeah.
They're writing the vegetarian position papers, and they also own a program called the Complete Health Improvement Program. And despite the mandate on their websites suggesting that they're not a vegan or vegetarian mandate, if you have a look at the facilitator guide on the worst possible health outcomes, like the red side, like the worst possible health outcomes, you've got meat, milk, eggs, before alcohol, tobacco and processed foods. And you think, wait a minute, this is definitely not good. And that they run that as a health and wellness program in the churches, community, in the hospitals, and workplace wellness programs around the world.
Yeah.
And they're running facilitator programs even in the UK. Like it's, you don't avoid it. And Sanitarium sell Up and Go. So Up and Go in the UK is a Sanitarium from Australia. And they also provide soy milks, I think, as well in the UK.
Can I ask you a question? I don't, when I heard all this, I just went, oh my God. I was more focused on the fact that Kellogg's had so successfully got me as a child, my mother and father, to give me cornflakes and God knows what else. Are they a Christian church or are they some other thing? I haven't looked into them.
They call themselves Christian Evangelicals. They're young earth creationists. They truly believe in 6-day creation. They tend to focus on the First Testament. That's why they use the laws of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. That's why they have all those food laws like Judaism. But they've been commissioned from God to be the spiritual children of Israel. So unlike Judaism, where people who are Jews are very proud of their religion, but they stay within their religion, they're not trying to convert the entire world. Seventh-day Adventism are trying to convert people. They believe from my readings that Jesus won't come back until enough people have given up meat and enough people have become Adventists or heard the message.
The thing that's obvious is, if you look at all the symbology around Christ, first of all, isn't he the good shepherd? First of all, and the loaves and the fishes. Anyway, that's just baffling. But before we go, but moving on a little bit, you said at the beginning, and I think it's important to say it again, neither you nor I are anti-vegan or vegetarian.
Or religion.
Or religion, absolutely not. And the whole thing, when I went, inevitably because of my health challenge, I believe my health challenge was a manifestation of a very poor diet that was sold to me as a healthy diet. I believe it killed my mother. I could go on and on and on, right? And what happened is that I realized that for 12 years, I was vegetarian and vegan, on and off, changing back and forward. Good boy, no meat, nothing.
Yeah.
And what I realized actually in reflection was I wasn't a vegan or a vegetarian. What I was a granarian. It was a word I created. I was a granarian that ate vegetables too. But the basis of my diet was grains everywhere. Grains everywhere. And now, obviously, with where we've come, with wheat belly and grain brain and all the other breakthroughs, and keto, I realized that I'd been completely conned by the industry and by well-meaning people getting caught up in it. And it's a real tragedy. Because I think I repeatedly say things like, I think it's our civic duty to do what you guys did, and that is to alert people. What people do with the information's up to them, but just keep giving them the information, and then they can make their own minds up. The challenge is getting them to even look at it. And I get people who'll be on here, and I'm begging them, can you just send a link? Yeah. And well, obviously the guy who shared that little thing on Facebook has, but lots of them I know are scared to. We got to get out of our comfort zone, and they do raise it occasionally, family or friends, and they glaze over. But I think it's our duty, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Who's going to do this? And there's me, innocent Jack, got a little nice wee YouTube channel, and they're starting to take down my YouTube videos. It's
that's amazing.
And the biggest one, the one that I noticed was going, was the one where we covered the seed oils with with Ben Kenobi, Dr. Kenobi. It's gone. And they say, when I went in and say, YouTube took down these videos. Don't tell me why. Yeah, and I'm like, I'm going to see if I can find it and reload it. Yeah. And there's others have disappeared. God almighty. And I'm not really getting.
Yeah, it's really big. I think we certainly didn't. We were so naive. Like when Gary started talking about sugar.
Yeah.
And we stepped in, I say, bright spots and landmines. Like Gary was just going, wow. He honestly said, I can't believe when I tell them at the hospital about how we can make people better with type 2 diabetes. Oh my gosh, this is going to be over. We had no idea. We live in this tiny little island, remember? And he just thought he'd come up with this brilliant idea. And wow, we're going to change everything. And here we are 8 years later. And there's not much has changed. Certainly the guidelines haven't changed.
No.
But more people know about it. And I think the more people who know about it, the more people who start to question, start to stand up, as you say, go to their doctor. Now, the big challenge, low carb, keto, carnivore, whatever you choose, has this thing over it that people fear as a health professional. You just have to hear it because they've just been told over and over it's dangerous, it's unsustainable, whatever. Yeah. So what we tend to say to people is, just say you're on a Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean, it can be whatever you choose as a Mediterranean. But I also agree that it's important for people to go, well, I'm actually getting really well, like the patients did with Eric Westman, and he listened.
Yeah.
And they just said, I've gone low carb, I'm eating healthy fats, and I've improved my health. Look at my markers. Look how well I am now.
Yeah.
And I look at Gary and I think, I nearly lost him in 2009.
Yeah.
I nearly lost him in 2000. And he is just incredible. He's healthy. He's out there helping others. Just, he has gone back to golf.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we've also had Dr. Dannenberg, who's reversed himself out of actually a hospice. When he was dying with cancer, he's reversed himself out on on more or less a carnivore diet, you know, and he was, and people loved him when we interviewed him. But so I think, so Gary presumably thinks that by going low carb and changing his lifestyle, that helped him cure himself or reverse out of his cancer.
Didn't cure him. His cancer's still there,
Still there.
but it's in remission.
Yeah.
It's in remission.
Yeah, forgive me, that's the
and
I should use, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing. He's got his health back.
Yeah.
This is a man who was taking chemo, he was on chemotherapy for 11.5 years.
Yeah.
And it makes you sick. And all the other medications.
Yeah.
So blood pressure and all sorts of things. He's made himself well, and he could never do that on a high carb, low fat diet, which he was truly following.
Yeah.
He did love chocolate, but apart from that, he was eating his cereals, his grains, his juice, his low fat, everything, like margarines, low fat milk. Like, it was just, he actually told me breakfast was the most important meal of the day. And I would say, I don't really like breakfast. You know, I intermittently fasted from my own choice since I was a teenager, just because I didn't really like breakfast, because I didn't like cereal. And he used to say to me, it's the most important meal of the day, Belinda, you've got to eat breakfast. I go, no. Finally, when I was in my 40s, he convinced me. And then 6 years later, he went, actually, no, take that back. So I was like, but yeah, that's how he grew up. He ate a lot of grain, a lot of bread, a lot of pasta, rice, just all of those things. He based his meal on the food pyramid.
Yeah. So apart from the constant campaigning, for want of a term, presumably people are getting better. Patients are getting better. You've got presumably the pre-diabetic, the diabetic, all getting better. Maybe people in cancer getting better, you know, moving into remission and so on. And I should say, you know, Dr. Dannenberg did mention, of course, it is remission, you know, for him as well. You know, it's not cure. So you must be getting results which are inspiring and keep you going, yeah?
Some people do really, really well. Others go to the hospital, to their diabetes clinic, or go to the endocrinologist or go somewhere else, and they go, oh, it'll kill you. Fear fat, cholesterol, but what about this, what about that? It's tricky. But enough people are seeing incredible health benefits. Yeah. And just, making that change. It's amazing. But that is something we're still up against. And the dietitians at the hospital still fear fat. Again, they're educated over and over and over. Like, that's everything they'll be getting, every conference they go to, all of their communications from the Dietitians Association of Australia. It's just anti-low carb, anti-meat, and it's really hard to fight. Again, if they start to challenge it, then they are targets for being reported or losing their license. I mean, this is ridiculous. And that's why I said to Gary, it's not about the science. What are the forces that are shaping these guidelines? And when you realize how powerful they are, pharmaceutical, food, and ideology, you're up against a very big, strong group of people that will take videos down, that will silence a doctor in Tasmania, will silence a doctor in South Africa, and Anna Dahlquist up in Sweden. You know, she was targeted as well. Karen Zinn in New Zealand, a dietitian. Like, they come after these people who are starting to make a noise because they're a threat. Yeah. And we have to help them.
Okay, to change it a little bit for the people who, for the theme of why I've been doing this, I need to keep loyalty, otherwise I become. So without getting into the politics or otherwise of vaccines or whatever people might fear there or not fear there, in terms of given the circles you guys move in, the sort of people that you must be speaking to, and the research you've done, I mean, what is your current thinking about, you know, people, you know, a lot of the people who'll be watching this are probably 40, 50, 60, 70. What do you think would be a good thing to do to strengthen ourselves should COVID come calling. Your thoughts on that? Are you able to speak about that?
I think Andreas Einfeld, diet doctor, said he was diagnosed with COVID last week.
Oh, was he? Wow.
I think, and he said he's really well, he's feeling well. The people that appear to do well are metabolically healthy.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you can keep yourself metabolically healthy, which generally means eating low carb, reducing sugars, processed foods, eating healthy animal proteins and fats. But then there's also pescatarians who can also do well. So it's not, and vegetarians with a lot of supplementation. It's about, I think, mostly reducing those processed foods, the seed oils, which you've mentioned, you know, really cutting those things that are inflammatory out of your diet.
Yeah. And
getting your vitamin D, getting exercise. I have to say I'm still working on those. Broke my ankle really badly, so I've got to get back out in the sun. It's about to be summer here, so I'm heading out. But yeah, I think keeping yourself as well as you can metabolically is one of the most important things you can do. And rest and sleep and
and so
whatever.
If someone looks you up on Google or wherever they go, what you found is that you were a nurse involved with older people. You were working with older people, weren't you? What is your thing about, again, from the networks you're part of and so on, what would you say about longevity? What would you be recommending? I know you're maybe not in that field any longer, but what would you suggest people might want to consider?
Well, I would think, again, being metabolically healthy is going to improve your aging. From what I've seen, and Gary's a firm believer in exercise, but not exercise as medicine, not the Coca-Cola branded exercise as medicine, but actually, you know, doing exercise to fatigue and doing small, heavier bursts, weightlifting.
Yeah.
That's weightlifting, but, you know, doing weights. And I think that also helps bone health. Like it keeps your muscle health, all of those things can improve it as well. And what you eat, obviously. It's a really interesting space to go because I've done a lot of research into the claims of longevity, looking at the Seventh-day Adventists, looking at the blue zones, looking at all of those things. And boy, oh boy, they start to crumble when you really look hard at them. The Okinawans in Japan, apparently after the war, a lot of people, there was no record of their birth dates anymore. So they realized they couldn't get some government funding if they weren't over 60. So all the people who are over 40 went, oh, well, let's just make ourselves over 60 instead. So there's actual documentation showing that suddenly these people who became centenarians are suddenly 120 and there's, you know, they've got, wait a minute, this isn't right. So birth certificates have been altered in a couple of the different spots of longevity that were claimed in the blue zones. And they've changed this narrative to make it plant-based. But if you look at the places where they were, they actually eat animal proteins and fats. Like it's changing this narrative. And Loma Linda is a typical blue zone where they claim this incredible longevity. Again, it's an area that's Seventh-day Adventist church. And what happens is it's a bit like a retirement village almost. The people who are really healthy as Seventh-day Adventists have been really committed to, I would suggest, eating really well, not grains, you know, just stuck in those grains. They have eaten fish. And if you look at the Adventist health studies and their longevity claims, they can actually eat meat once a month and still call themselves vegan.
Oh, is that right? Interesting.
So they call themselves vegan because that's what they believe they are, but they are keeping enough animal proteins and fats in their diet, I believe, the minimum amount you can do to actually keep healthy. And they're totally committed to the community, the religion, the exercise, and everything else that you need to potentially create health. It doesn't mean that they get away completely without cancer and all the other things, because we had a very high-profile doctor here in Australia, and he was a Seventh-day Adventist. He claimed to be a complete vegetarian, which they prefer to use rather than a vegan because of activism connotations. and he developed 2 cancers. So they're not immune either.
No.
But Loma Linda tends to have people who've gone there and totally committed their lives to being healthy. And in their retirement, they seem to be doing very, very well in comparison to others.
Yeah.
But if you go to the general church, because I have a lot of people who are Seventh-day Adventists or ex who write to me and say, our church is sick. So Loma Linda's being held up as a health halo.
Yes.
And they're probably doing it perfectly well. But the general population, when they're told by guidelines and Dietitians Association and the church to eat vegan food, to be vegan for the planet, to be vegan for our own health, they look at alternative meats, they look at the soy milks, they look at the cereals, they look at all those other things that are fortified, but they're not, the nutrients aren't the same bioavailability as they are. And you can't get vitamin B12 without eating animal proteins and fats unless you have injections or supplements. And yeah, it's compromising your health and your longevity, I believe. Yeah. So yeah, that was a very long-winded answer.
No, it's wonderful. I'm very aware of time. It always flies by. Do you mind if I ask you, presumably, given that right at the beginning of this, I read something and that mentioned intermittent fasting. Do you guys practice that? What are you typically eating, sort of thing to inspire people?
I'm an intermittent faster, as I said, I have been since I was a teenager. So I tend to eat 2 meals a day, and one's about 11:30, which I can do because I was a photographer for a very long time, and so my days often didn't start till the afternoon. So it's perfect for my lifestyle. But Gary finds after his entire life of having to have breakfast, he still can't not have breakfast.
Okay.
And when he goes to work, he might operate for 8 or 10 hours and not get a break. So in his mind, it's his way, and it suits everything that he does. He has breakfast and he has dinner.
Yeah.
Whereas I break my fast around about lunchtime.
Yeah.
But it suits us both how we do it, and we tend to eat meat and veg. We keep it really simple. Yeah. I make some granola out of seeds and nuts, which we have occasionally with a few berries and a bit of cream. But we tend to just eggs, meat, and a bit of low carb veg.
Yeah. Do you guys do coffee and tea, and do you occasionally have alcohol or whatever? Gary
has a little bit of alcohol occasionally. He used to drink it more regularly. Not that he was ever an alcoholic, but he used to drink it every week. I would say he would have had alcohol. Yeah. Me, I've just never really liked it. Again, I'm a bit weird, so we've never smoked. Neither of us have ever smoked, and neither of us have ever drunk a cup of coffee. That's just bizarre.
Okay.
We just never have. But Gary loves his fruit teas. He puts them in soda water or hot water.
Oh, wow.
Choose. And I do like a cup of English breakfast tea.
Do you? You devil, you.
My vice. Terrible person I am. I used to have sugar. It took me a while to wean the sugar out when Gary decided we couldn't have sugar anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we keep it really simple. Yeah. And I think that's the easiest way to make it sustainable and affordable, Yeah. We've got a beautiful liver that's made, liver pate. It's made locally, and just that on a bit of even just a bit of butter or just a little chunk on its own. Yeah. Is beautiful. And yes, keep it as simple as possible so it can be sustainable.
Yeah. Well, the time is absolutely flown by. Is there anything else you would like us to share with people watching this? I mean, what happens is this will go up on, I'll do this live with people on Facebook on Wednesday night. Wednesday night. Then on Thursday morning, it'll go in my YouTube channel, provided it's still there.
Yes.
I might not be there after speaking to you. They might just close me down.
Most of my talks are still up. I haven't seen any come down yet.
So, no, it'll go up on Thursday. I'll send you the links and stuff. But is there anything you would like to say to the guys in clothing?
I'd just like to say, I sound very strange with the research that I've done, but I promise you, I had no idea when I started looking into vested interests shaping our dietary guidelines. no idea how powerful the cereal industry were, and I didn't even consider the fact that the cereal industry was also the church, Seventh-day Adventist church.
Yeah.
So yeah, go looking, go researching. It's fascinating. And there's a guy, I can't remember his name, who wrote a book called The Fiber Menace. Right. And he's probably the first person I came across talking about Kellogg's and his obsession. And, there's some really interesting things. So I'm not the first person to talk about it, I promise. No. But I think I'm one of the first people to sort of really put together the Coca-Cola cereal church things and how they're creating a medical curriculum at the moment. And it's already been put out through in America and 8 universities, and they're trying to push for it here in Australia. I don't know about the UK. Yeah. But this medical curriculum will be anti-animal proteins and fats, not just demonizing saturated fats. And it's, I say, the Garden of Eden diet with a side of Coke. But imagine if our doctors are indoctrinated in this imagine the next generation's medical education is based on the principles of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and Coca-Cola. Yeah. I mean, it's quite scary. So they're welcome to go look at my website. It's isupportgary.com. Yeah. And I've got lots of information up there from my research. Yeah, I've got a YouTube channel.
I heard last week that Professor Tim Noakes Foundation is beginning to educate doctors too. They're going to get 3,000 on a program or something. Are you guys involved in that, or are you doing that type of thing?
Gary's just done a textbook. He's written a chapter for a textbook with Tim. Fantastic. And I actually did one of the lectures for the nurses. Not so much into my research, just more about health. And then Gary and Tim have kept in touch and been very close all the way along. In fact, when Gary was exonerated, the first person he wanted to call was Tim. Yeah. And let him know the news. I think, it's important to keep all these networks and connections, and it gives you a lot of strength.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really grateful, not just for everybody who watched this in our group, who's been on this journey with me since February, following coincidence. I'm also grateful because my sister, who I love dearly, is in Melbourne, and she's got celiac, so she's also always been gluten-free. But you give me an excuse to say, well, here, I've got someone from Australia. Could you at least watch it, and maybe it will just get in, and her, my nephew's in Tassie too. It just might let me get a wee bit more of a kind of, and my son is also out there in Australia, in Melbourne. It might just get a clink of light for them to go and explore some things. So thank you for doing that for me personally, and for everyone else. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for giving us your time. And folks watching this, remember, it's now what is that, 9:10 in the evening in Tasmania. We're getting into someone's evening life. So Belinda, thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful, and I wish you every success with everything you're doing. Thank you. Please continue to do it as best you can.
Well, thanks for being a voice as well, because I couldn't have gotten Gary exonerated without the people, without social media platforms, without all of these people coming forward and just making a lot of noise with me. So I have to thank everybody as well.
Thank you. Well, listen, take care. It's been great speaking to you. Bye now.
Okay, thank you. Bye.